There are two types of control. One you can see, touch, and taste: communism, fascism, dictatorship like apartheid in South Africa. You know that you're in a dictatorship. That has a finite life, because when people know the situation they're in and they can see their controllers, then the desire for human freedom, it may take some time, but that desire will eventually overturn that control. The greatest form of control is dictatorship you cannot see, the prison without the bars, as I call it, with the facade of freedom and this farce called democracy, which is ludicrously connected to the word freedom when it is anything but. And this covert control leads people to sit in a prison cell thinking they're free because they can't see the bars, because they appear to be free, but appearance is all that it is. So when you had this apparent explosion of freedom around the world, when the former colonies were given independence, what actually happened was dictatorship they could see was replaced by dictatorship they couldn't see, far more potent, far more effective.
The time has come for the world to move in a new direction. We must embrace a new era of engagement based on mutual interest and mutual respect, and our work must begin now.
And the president outlined his vision of a new world order in which the US would participate fully, one rooted on 4 basic principles:
non-proliferation and disarmament, the promotion of peace and security, the preservation of our planet, and a global economy that advances opportunity for all people.
Among the speakers that followed the US president, the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, speaking at the UN for the first time after 40 years in power. And waiving the UN Charter, he called for an end to any permanent membership of the Security Council, arguing that small nations should have the same rights as the big. It was a speech that lasted well over an hour and covered subjects ranging from jet lag to political assassinations.
And then the assassination or the killing of Kennedy in 63 or 62, President of the United States of America. Why? We want to know who killed him. Somebody who, by the name of Lee Harvey, and then another Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey. Why did he kill him? Of understanding and hypocrisy created to 65 wars after the establishment of the United Nations. The preamble states also that if there is a use of force, then there must be then it must be the United Nations force, so the United Nations military interventions, according to the joint ventures of the United Nations. Not country or 1, 2 country or 3 country using the force or the military power. The United Nations, all of it, will decide to go to war to maintain peace and world security. And if there is any aggression by one country against another after the 45, after the establishment of this United Nations, if there is any aggression against any country, the United Nations altogether should deter and stop this aggression, and should check this aggression. I mean, if a country, any country, Libya, for instance, makes an attack against France or aggression against France, then the whole United Nations should check the Libyan aggression against France, because France is a member state, independent state in the United General Assembly, that is a sovereign country, a member states of the United Nations, and all of us that we have to protect the sovereignty of all nations collectively. But 65 wars, aggressive war, took place without any actions from the United Nations to stop and check these wars. And 8 fierce big wars, and victims of these wars amount to millions, made or initiated by the countries who...
Of course, there is no question that Libya
and the world would be better off with Gaddafi out of power. I, along with many other world leaders, have embraced that goal and will actively pursue it through non-military means. But broadening our military mission to include regime change would be a mistake. The task that I assigned our forces, to protect the Libyan people from immediate danger and to establish a no-fly zone, carries with it a UN mandate and international support. It's also what the Libyan opposition asked us to do. If we tried to overthrow Gaddafi by force, our coalition would splinter. We would likely have to put U.S. troops on the ground to accomplish that mission, or risk killing many civilians from the air. The dangers faced by our men and women in uniform would be far greater. So would the costs and our share of the responsibility for what comes next. To be blunt, we went down that road in Iraq. Thanks to the extraordinary sacrifices of our troops and the determination of our diplomats, we are hopeful about Iraq's future. But regime change there took 8 years, thousands of American and Iraqi lives, and nearly $1 trillion. That is not something we can afford to repeat in Libya. It may not happen overnight, as a badly weakened Gaddafi tries desperately to hang on to power. But it should be clear to those around Gaddafi and to every Libyan that history is not on Gaddafi's side. With the time and space that we have provided for the Libyan people, they will be able to determine their own destiny. And that is how it should be.
Well, to discuss the events in Libya, I'm now joined live by Anthony Weil. He's founder and chief editor of the online newspaper, The Daily Bell, joining me there in Zurich. Well, we hear a lot about the anti-Gaddafi forces, but we actually know next to nothing about who they are. What do you make of them? Who do you think are their leaders?
Well, the leaders, there's quite a bit of speculation as to actually who is pulling the strings of what's happening in Libya. For example, the UK Telegraph recently ran a piece which talked a fair amount about the Alliance for Youth Movements, which is an effort that was formed in the United States by Jared Cohen, who was the former top advisor to both Condoleezza Rice as well as Hillary Clinton in the State Department, and he, along with the support of the State Department, formed the Alliance for Youth Movements and their affiliated website called movements.org. What's important about this is that that organization has as its stated mission, along with several multinational corporations who sponsor the organization, its mission is to provide a conduit, a training, so to speak, platform for instruction of how to organize and prepare for, let's say, electronic-driven protests or communications revolutions like the ones we're seeing driven in Libya today. And there is a heavy footprint involved in both the sands of Tunisia as well as Egypt, and now in Libya with this organization. So there's a direct tie-in to the U.S. State Department here. As a matter of fact, in 2009, Hillary Clinton gave the keynote address speech in Mexico City for this organization. So that would be an example of a foreign organization that seems to have some leadership influence on the ground in Libya.
You say...
You know, I don't think he's going to be able to survive. You know, his financial means have been severely hampered here. If there's a no-fly zone instituted by NATO with the U.S. Standing off the shores and the British with warships ready to move at any time, I think the muscle is being flexed and the message has been sent. I don't think Gaddafi's going to survive.
We have a responsibility to act. That's what's happened in Libya over the course of these last 6 weeks.
And what's happening in the Middle East, Alex? I'll put the picture up on the screen. That picture is of countries that are, and there are more, that are targeted to be taken over by the NATO, European Union, North American cabal. And when I say that, it's not the British doing this or the Americans doing this. It's being done through those countries using those countries, but actually the American government and the British government and the French government with old Sarkozy and stuff, they're just satellites of this global cabal. They're not representatives of the people of those countries.
They were captured by the banking cartel many centuries ago, many of them.
Yes, they were.
They're engines.
They're vehicles, and the governments of the world are, the vast majority of them anyway, and they want to make it all of them, are actually like transnational corporation subsidiary companies of the global, company, and they carry out the orders of the centrally dictated headquarters of this network, and that's why, as you pointed out earlier, we're seeing the same things being introduced in countries all over the world at the same time. This is how it's done. And if we look at that map, first of all, it's worth looking to the right, where Somalia and Ethiopia and a place called Djibouti, just across the sea from Yemen. That is the African base of AFRICOM. Now, what the American military, and the American military too, is just a satellite military of the global cabal. They call it the American military, but it's not. It has all that money spent on it, fantastic amounts of money. So it basically spends more money on the military, America, than the rest of the world.
Well, notice the French have now invaded via NATO the Ivory Coast and are backing the rebels slaughtering people. This is AFRICOM moving into Africa.
Exactly, but the reason so much fantastic amounts of money are spent on the American military is not for the benefit of the American people. It's because that is at the moment the main point of military imposition for the cabal. And of course, Britain being one of the great centres of the cabal, not the British government, but the City of London, etc., it's always in the slipstream of America when it goes into a country. So from AFRICOM, it was created during the Boyd Bush administration, and the question is, why has America got an African command? Well, it's Africa. Well, the idea is to pick these countries off, and Zbigniew Brzezinski, in his book Grand Chessboard in 1998, he said that the key area to control the world is what he calls Eurasia. And Eurasia is basically Europe across to China and then down into the Middle East. And what we've seen, Alex, over the last many, many years is that process of picking off the key areas of Eurasia, and now they're moving into Africa. What they want, for a start, is to take the whole of those North African countries over, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, where, of course, they've had the trouble. There's now protests in Jordan and Syria. They're the target countries too. They've got Iraq. They're in there. And then, bingo, there's the big one to the right of Iraq, Iran. And then they're already in Afghanistan. They're totally coldly destabilizing Pakistan, and then just off that map you're hitting the Chinese border, and these countries are being systematically targeted. And what they're doing in the Muslim world is playing off the divisions going back, goodness me, tell me it's not true, to the 7th century between the Shia Muslims and the Sunni Muslims. And the reason that Saudi Arabia and people like the United Arab Emirates are being allowed to go into Bahrain and create and commit terrible atrocities to suppress the people's rebellion in Bahrain, and been allowed to do it with no reaction and no condemnation while everything's targeted on Libya, is because they want to play Saudi Arabia, that is overwhelmingly a Sunni Muslim country, and others around it. They want to use them in their targeting of Iran, which is really the center of the Shiite Muslim world. It's dominated Iran by Shiite Muslims. And so if they get Iran...
There's a new documentary out that says that Osama bin Laden is living in Tehran. Is Osama bin Laden in Tehran?
Your question is laughable.
Why?
The U.S. government has invaded Afghanistan in order to arrest bin Laden. They probably know where bin Laden is. If they don't know where bin Laden is, why did they invade? First, they invaded. Then they tried to find out where he is. Is that logical? Do you think this is logical?
What I think is that you didn't answer my question. Is he in Tehran or not?
Our position is quite clear. Some journalists have said bin Laden is in Iran. These words don't have legal value. Our position towards Afghanistan and against terrorism is quite clear.
Is it true or not?
Maybe you know, but I don't know.
I'm asking you, you're the president of Iran.
I don't know such a thing. You are giving news which is very strange.
So let me ask it a different way. If you did know that Osama bin Laden was in Tehran, would you show him hospitality? Would you expel him? Would you arrest him?
I heard that Osama bin Laden is in Washington, D.C.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did. He's there because he was a previous partner of Mr. Bush. They were colleagues, in fact, in the old days. You know that. They worked together. Mr. bin Laden never cooperated with Iran, but he cooperated with Mr. Bush.
I'll ask one more time and then I'll let you go. If you knew that Osama bin Laden was in Tehran, which you say you don't, if you knew, would you expel him? Would you arrest him? Would you show him hospitality?
Our borders are closed to the illegal entry of anyone. Anyone, whoever that may be. Whether it's the 3 American mountaineers, Mr. bin Laden, or anyone else, the borders are closed. Our position is clear.
But you deny categorically that he's in Tehran today. He is not. Osama bin Laden is not in Tehran today?
Rest assured that he's in Washington. I think there's a high chance he's there.
I don't agree, but thank you for your time, Mr. President.
In the beginning of the past century, beautiful mottos of freedom, human rights, and democracy created hopes for healing the deep wounds of the past. Today, however, not only those dreams are not realized, but memories, even at times more bitter than before, have been recorded in our history. As a result of the 2 world wars, the occupation of Palestine, the Korean and the Vietnam wars, the Iraq war against Iran, the occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as many wars in Africa, hundreds of millions of people were killed, wounded, or displaced. Terrorism, illicit drug production, poverty, and the social gaps have increased. The dictatorial and coup d'etat governments in Latin America committed unprecedented crimes with the support of the West. Instead of disarmament, the proliferation and stockpiling of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons expanded, placing the world under a larger threat. As a result, apparently, the very same old goals of colonialists and the slave masters were pursued, but this time around with a new facade. The second cause for the failure of the existing world order and capitalism has to do with the current global management and its ruling structures. The League of Nations and after that the United Nations were established with the promise to bring about peace, security, and the realization of human rights, which in fact meant a global management. One can analyze the current system of governance of world affairs by examining 3 events. The first is the event of the 11th September 2001, which has indeed affected the entire world for almost a decade. We recall that at the time, suddenly the news of an attack on the Twin Towers was broadcast, using numerous footages of the incident. Almost all governments and known figures that mattered strongly condemned this incident. But then a propaganda machine came into full force. It was implied that the whole world was now exposed to a huge danger, namely that of terrorism, and that the only way to save the world would be to deploy forces into Afghanistan. Eventually, Afghanistan and shortly thereafter, Iraq were occupied. Now, please take note. It was said that some 3,000 people were killed on September 11, for which we are all very saddened. Yet, up until now, in Afghanistan and Iraq, hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, millions wounded and displaced, and the conflict is still going on and expanding. In identifying those responsible behind the September 11 attack, terrorists. There were three viewpoints. First, that a very powerful and complex terrorist group able to successfully cross all layers of the American intelligence and security carried out the attack. This is the prevalent viewpoint, which has been supported mainly and advocated by American statesmen. Second, that some segments within the U.S. government orchestrated the attack to reverse the declining American economy and its grips on the Middle East in order to save the Zionist regime. The majority of the American people, as well as most nations and politicians around the world, agree with this view. Third, it was carried out by a terrorist group, but that the American government supported and took advantage of the situation. Apparently, this viewpoint has fewer proponents. The main evidence for this viewpoint links the incident with a few passports found in the huge volume of rubble and a video of an individual whose place of domicile was unknown, but it was announced that he had been involved in oil deals with some American officials. It was also covered up and said that due to the explosion and fire, no trace of suicide attackers was found. Regardless of each of these three viewpoints, there remain a few questions to be answered. First, would it not have been sensible that first a thorough investigation should have been conducted by independent groups to conclusively identify the elements involved in the attack and then map out a rational plan to take measures against them? Second, assuming the viewpoint of the American government, is it rational to launch a classic war through widespread deployment of troops that led to the death of hundreds of thousands of people to counter a terrorist group? Third, was it not possible to act the way Iran conducted the Rigi operations, fighting the Rigi terrorist group who killed and wounded 400 innocent people? In the Iranian operation, no innocent person was harmed. It is proposed that the United Nations set up an independent fact-finding group for ladies and gentlemen. I announce clearly that the occupation of other countries under the pretext of freedom and democracy is an unforgivable crime. The world needs the logic of compassion and justice and inclusive participation instead of the logic of force, domination, unilateralism, war, and humiliation. The world needs to be governed by virtuous people like the divine prophets.
We have a responsibility to act. That's what's happened.
And these people, in the end, are just puppets of this force. And like I say, I'll just go back on that one, but only quickly. This is to emphasize the point that because of their genetic makeup and energetic makeup, and the way that I now begin to understand they're connected to this schism energy in terms of their perception, this is why they can do these things and have no emotional consequence whatsoever, because they appear to have a very low, at least low, sometimes non-existent level of empathy with the consequences for others of their actions.
I'm sick of this, and I'll tell you why I'm sick of it, because while these pathetic, naive people, despite all the evidence before them, are looking the other way, oh no, it's just paranoia, while they're doing that, they are allowing these people to impose their will on my children and my life, and I'm not having it. And if people would just engage a few more brain cells, open the eyes and look, they will see the scale of fascism, no other word for it, that we are being subjected to today. And if you don't wake up and you go on looking the other way, well, the fascism just gets more, and eventually it'll dawn on you, and by then it will be too late. Don't look to me for sympathy when it happens, mate, because you got your chance now.
Rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep has fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. When we figure that out, there goes their way of life.